Welcome back, I'm Bill. Here's a neat one for you. This is a red 335. I know, they're usually green. Very early on they made them in red. I picked this up last week. This was the thing I was going to work on today. As you can see, it's in pretty rough shape in terms of the fount and the paint. And needing new paint, it needs a new decal. And I ordered one. And I was expecting to have it by today. But Canada Post decided to go on strike. And that envelope with the decal in it is locked up somewhere in Canada Post system. So our red friend will have to wait. I thought, hey, I haven't done a 220E video, I don't think. And this guy needs a lot of work too, and they're both red, so I can work on them at the same time. Needs a new decal as well. I'm going to repaint it. Guess where it is? So let's set those red heads aside. We'll work on this instead. Probably more interesting anyways. This is an L228. It was made in January 1929. They were made, this is an American one, but they were made between 1928 and 1930. This is the very first of the 228s. They had a 220 version as well. I've got a video on one of those. That was a Canadian one. They're pretty much the same though, regardless of which factory they were made in. Like I said, first generation of 220s and 228s. I actually kind of like these better than the later ones in terms of the design. Coleman's first instant lighting lanterns. The 220 had the regular size brim like this. The 228 has the wider brim. So I actually picked this up when I was down in the States last summer for the International Coleman Collectors Convention. My wife and I were camping for several weeks, and I was thinking I only took one working lantern down with me to use because I was taking so many other things down, and I thought it's always nice to have a couple lanterns. So I was hoping I could take this on our camping trip afterward and have it as a secondary lantern, and it had issues. So I've already taken some of it apart. Someone has taken it apart before me, so a few things were eased up for me in advance. But we'll get into this here. Take the vent off. Got our vent nut. Like all 228s, it's white on the bottom. The idea was to reflect the light down. It's a good picnic table lantern. It's got, I might say this is original. This is not the globe, or the chimney rather, that was on this when I found it. But it is the same style, same design. This one may be off a 327, roughly the same time period. It works, and it's a little sticky. All the mica is intact, so it's really nice. The one that was on it actually had the Coleman stamp on the mica, and I gave that back to the guy who sold this to me, and we swapped it out for this because the one with the Coleman logo on it is expensive, out of my budget. So we've just got a basic one here. This should clean up really nicely. I will put it in citric acid, as you'll see later, and that will clean the mica, and it will clean the rust off the steel frame. Now, onto the lantern. You might be able to see some markings on here. So someone has taken these burner tubes off at some point in time. I haven't yet, so I'm not sure what's going on there. The lantern, I got it working. So I know the air tubes and all of that are clear, but as far as what may or may not come off with the burner caps and the tubes and all that, I don't know. The two problems that I had with this, initially it wouldn't pass any fuel because the fuel pickup was completely clogged. Clogged would be an understatement. The fount and the fuel system in this were pretty much, I think, hands down the worst I've ever seen on any lantern. Someone probably left unleaded gas in here for a really long time, and everything was completely covered in thick green crust. So I have taken the uppers off of this to the point where I could get down into the valve. So now that we're going to get into that, and the main problem with this, it's got an R55 on here, which was a later fitment. They're great because they have the cleaning actuator. Some of the early 220s and 228s were designed for, I think it's a Q70 or Q77. which had a cleaning needle that screws into the end of the valve stem, and it would move up and down as you open and close the valve. Those often snapped off, and the later ones don't even have the threaded bit to put the cleaning lever or the cleaning rod in. But the problem with this is the valve body itself here, where the generator screws in, is stripped out. Someone over-tightened a generator in there at some point. I'm pretty sure it's brass. The generator, the screw part, the nut is steel, and so someone over-tightened it and stripped it out so it would leak fuel here. I did get it running. I wrapped it with some Teflon tape just so I could get it to seal and get it fairly tight. And I did get it running just to make sure everything was working right, but I'm not really comfortable running it like that. I know that stuff's supposed to be fuel resistant and all that, but I just don't trust that. So I haven't had this lit for more than 5 minutes. But I do know everything is working other than that. So I already have here another valve block, thanks to old Coleman parts, and we will install that at the appropriate time. So let me get you zoomed in here as we start taking this guy apart. Okay, let's take this R55 off. Like I said, this was the later option. These were preferred because they've got the cleaning lever on them. And that's loose already. You can see that white Teflon tape on there. I don't really recommend that, but I did want to see if I could get it going. This generator does seem to be in good shape. I will clean it though. I'll set that aside. I'll unwrap that Teflon tape later. Now we'll take this screw out here, and probably the same size actually. Yep. 5/16. This holds the generator or the valve block in place. Just got that there. So I'll hold this from below. Now, some of you watched my 220 video and I was missing this part. The guy who sold it to me realized that when he saw the video, and so he sent it to me. So if you were worried about that, my 220 does now have the little t-shirt block in it now. All that is so that the steel screw hits that piece of steel instead of the brass valve block. So once that's out, the valve block just drops down, and you can see how that works. There is a little hole right here. So the fuel comes up from the fount, up through the middle here, and out through that little hole and into the valve block. It's tapered. That screw pushes this in so that it seals against there. 9/16. Yep, 9/16. Again, this valve block is toast. The graphite packing in here seems to be in good shape, so I'm not going to replace that. Got some fuel in there, so I'm just going to clean all of this up and reuse it as it is. Boy, nasty. Now, this just the top part, the burner, just unscrews. These are different from the later 220s, and I'll show you that in a minute. Actually, they have quite a few differences, even though they work on the same theory of operation. So this is all one cast piece. I'm not sure if the vent stud would come out of there or not, but if it does come out, because it's probably threaded in, but you'd likely damage that in the process. So let's see about these burner tubes. This one, someone's obviously already tried to take apart. Oh, and that's loose. So that came off. I'm not going to bother. I guess we can. Oh, okay, that cap came off easily enough. So I'll go ahead and take that apart. So there's our tube. Short threads go at the top. The longer threads, actually they might be the same. Some of them have shorter and longer. I think these are the same. Oh, and that one's already loose. And yeah. I'm going to leave that on there. As long as we can get the tube off, I can get this cleaned and polished up, and I can get the burner cap cleaned and polished and everything, and I can see through there right now. There's nothing in there, no obstruction, so there's no pressing need to get that cap off. And that's our mixing chamber or manifold. It's all one cast piece, and unlike later 220s, there's no screw, set screw to lock it onto the top of the air tube. Now, at this point, these are different. 220s were always kind of weird in this way, and they continued to be after this. So we've got our air tube that runs down here, and on later 220s, we'd want to, there's a screw in the back that locks it into the upper part of the valve body. These don't have that. These are actually pressed into place, and you can't really see it now. Hopefully I can show you when we get it apart. But the bottom is sort of, I don't know if you call it crimped or what, but this is round. The bottom has been sort of crimped into a triangle shape so that it is locked in here. So what we want to do now, since we can't rotate this upper part of the valve because the air tube goes down through the burner frame. So this should be loose enough. If it weren't, I would need to put pliers on here, or do like you do with a later 220 and put a long wrench on the upper valve block and put a screwdriver through here and turn it. But this is already loose enough, because someone else had it apart and then I had it apart, that we should be able to just turn it. And we're going to unscrew the entire upper assembly from the fount. There we go. That all came apart. So here's our collar. Take note of the orientation. It's fairly simple. The bottom is tilted up. The top is straight all the way across. That's important because this actually locks into the bottom of the burner cage. So here is our burner cage and our bail. These aren't really meant to come apart, so we'll leave it as it is. I suspect if you tried to bend that, they'd probably end up breaking. And here's the valve body. This little nut just helps lock the burner cage and collar down in place. We'll take that off just so that we can get everything cleaned and polished. All right, and then we've got this little riser nipple that screws into the top of the fount. The fuel and air tube fits into that, and see, someone's been in here too from the look of the brass. The last two L220 I worked on, I did not take this off because I couldn't get it off for anything, and I was afraid of using an impact wrench on it. But since someone has already been in here, it looks like ½ an inch. Let's see if, just see. All right. One of you yelled at me in the comments for not taking this off and said there's a screen in there that needs to be cleaned. I wasn't aware of that. As far as I could tell, it just went straight through. There's just it's tapered to a smaller opening, and there is no screen in there. So whoever was yelling at me for that, yeah, no screen. So it was all right that I didn't take it apart on that other one. Oh, and I was going to show you. You can see the air tube is round, but it's been squished into a triangular shape on the bottom side. So there is no way this is coming apart any more than that. Now, our fuel and air tube. This is loose because I had it apart before. Oh boy, that's crusty. if you're working on one of these, you may have to take some needle nose pliers and jimmy it around a bit until it breaks free, but they do come out. And you can see, let me get a paper towel here. Like I said, this was the crustiest one I've ever seen, and it's been sitting with fuel in it. In fact, I haven't drained it yet. And that seems to actually be loosening some of this up. But when I tried to fuel this up and light it, there was no fuel getting through here. So I popped this out, and there are two little tiny holes here that the fuel goes through, and this whole thing was just covered in green crust. So it wouldn't let anything through. So I ended up just taking, actually I took the cleaning needle from an old model, like Model 1, Model 2 generator, and used it to clear these holes, and got fuel feeding through so it would actually run. The way this works, actually, it works more or less on the same principle as the later fuel and air tubes, but instead of having a tube on the inside and then an outer tube, this just has two tubes side by side. So what happens is this tube is open at the top, so you pump air into the top of the fount. That pressure not only pressurizes it to push the fuel out, but that air is also used in lighting so that it doesn't flood. So this doesn't have the deal where you open the knob a quarter of a turn and it keeps an air wire pushed down to block the fuel pickup orifice so that it doesn't flood. In this case, when you open the valve, air rushes down through this hole, goes down this one tube. They meet at the bottom here. A tiny bit of fuel is going through these openings into the fuel pickup. The air picks that up and then carries it up through this tube on the right to of course the valve is sitting up here, and you get air with a little bit of fuel in it that allows the lantern to light, but not so much that it floods. Then eventually, because of the pressure in the fount and all of that, and then you get pressure built up back from the generator and all that, and it also takes very, very little fuel to actually run one of these. It basically cuts off the airflow, and you just get the fuel from the pickup here. So unscrew that. So this is actually a brass mesh screen around here, and then you've got these two little holes. So sitting here in the fuel has actually, I wonder if it's modern, I've got modern unleaded in there, and it's probably got Tecron or something in there, and I don't know, maybe that has broken down the crust. But this mesh was completely crusted over, and so were the two little holes. So the only way it was getting fuel was because I poked a cleaning needle into those little holes. So this is just a screen. Back in the day when these were made, even white gas wasn't necessarily clean. People used unleaded, and you might siphon it out of the fuel tank on your Model T or something, and it may have sediment in it. So that's why they have these screens down at the bottom. I suspect that's why Coleman later changed the design on these, because of that sediment problem. So inside the screen, this is our actual pickup orifice, and it may look familiar. If you hear pounding rain and howling wind, we're just at the very beginnings this afternoon of they're calling it an autumnal cyclone here on Vancouver Island. There's a massive low pressure zone about 400 kilometers southwest of us, and we're supposed to have fairly soon 100 plus kilometer an hour winds. So if you hear that, that's what's going on outside. So here is our fuel pickup. If it looks familiar, it should. It looks and is basically exactly the same as the tip on a generator. The only difference is that the orifice in the tip is considerably larger. Still tiny, but considerably larger than on a generator. So we'll set that aside. You don't want to, if you're working on one of these, pay attention to that. Don't mix up your generator tip and your pickup tip. basically, if you do get them mixed up, once they're cleaned up, the easy way to tell them apart is that if you hold the pickup tip up to a bright light, you'll be able to see the light through it very easily, whereas with the generator tip, that's actually pretty difficult. So this is the rest of our pickup tube, fuel and air tube, and that's all there is to it. That won't come apart any more than that. Now, and we've just got our, this is, you know, the bung, there's nothing more in there. Now let's take our pump apart. Like the 427s, it's got a screw-on cap. This guy also has a bad check valve, so I've got another one of those around here somewhere as well. And let's see here. The pump leather on this is actually good, but it is pretty stiff. Just gonna, there's a hex nut on the end, and we'll unscrew that. So there's a little brass washer inside there that kind of helps the leather keep its shape. We've got the pump leather itself. We've got this little cylinder spacer that helps keep the pump leather centered and keeps it from getting crushed by that nut. And then we've got another washer in there. That's the backing plate for the leather. And we've got another nut here. Holds it all together from the top, and that one's going to be tight. These are often difficult to get off. They're on there tight to begin with, and then the threads are all filled with gunk. So sometimes you need to clean the threads out a bit before those will come off. But we're good here. So we've got a spring and the cap, and there's the pump handle itself. And now the check valve. To remove the check valve, you need a check valve tool. I strongly urge you, if you don't have the tool, I don't know why this is so tight, but if you don't have a check valve tool, just leave the check valve in place. So we'll thread this down inside. It threads in the same way the air stem threads in. Let's thread it all the way. And then it's got two ears here, and we put that down and we turn it until those ears lock in place. Some of these will have a wing nut. I should really replace this with a wing nut, it would be easier. Tighten that up. There we go. And that was nice and easy without the tool. They're usually very difficult, and I'll show you what happens. What ends up happening is if you just try to turn this with a large screwdriver, it almost always ends up slipping, and you end up tearing out this slot. And once you've done that, you're pretty much stuck having to use an easy out to get the thing out. Now this check valve will not seal. I've had it out before, and I haven't been able to recover it. Actually, Darryl, you asked me about this. I have had really poor luck with these old large diameter check valves. These were in the 427s and the early, like the L220s and 228s, and I think they may have been in some of the early 220 and 228Bs, and they were in the Canadian A's. You also find them in some of the early 2 and 9 stoves. I've actually never found one that would properly seal. I've had to replace every single early check valve I have come across, Coleman ones that is. So I do have a replacement for this. I know I've got a video on cleaning these and trying to recover them, and I've never had any of those things work on these old ones. I mean, they should work. I don't know if I've just had bad luck, and you know, it shouldn't be the case that every one I find has a problem, but that happens to have been my problem. So I've got a new one for this. Old Coleman Parts sells replacements that I think are new manufactured just for them. So the last thing we need to do is the fuel cap. Now, I'm reasonably certain this is not the original fuel cap. They should have a winged cap on them, but those winged caps are worth their weight in gold at this point, so I'm not surprised that this has a different cap on it. So what you do is screw that down tightly, take out the screw, and then unscrew it, and this outer cap comes off, and then you've got the inner cap here. I'm going to replace this seal. It actually feels pretty good, and it does hold pressure, but I feel more comfortable replacing it, and I've got plenty of them. So that's it. All I need to do is dump the gas out of this, and we'll be ready to go. So sequence of events next is the fount, all of these parts, and as well as the burner cage and the chimney need to go in a citric acid solution. Careful note, if you're doing this and you have one of these mica chimneys, put the chimney in the citric acid solution first when it's clean. If you put it in later and the citric acid solution has turned, you know, yellow, green, brown from having all these other parts in it, it will get between the layers of mica and you will never get it out. So you really want to use clean citric acid for cleaning the globe. So I'm going to do that first, then these other parts, and I will clean the vent. I've already done a little bit of cleaning on this back when I got it, but it could do with a little bit more cleaning, I think. So those will be the next steps, and we'll go from there.
Well, here's a preview. You guys haven't seen this one yet. This is a Model 2B stove that I picked up last summer. Very, 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 very rare. And it will be a future project. I'm not sure exactly when. It needs some cosmetic work. It runs great, as you can see. So I'm set up out here in the garage instead of the kitchen today. I've got the mica in the large pot on the right, and I've got the brass parts over on the left, and I will let these simmer away for a good 30 minutes or so. The citric acid solution is 1 teaspoon per liter of water, and that's always been sufficient for me. So I will see you when all these are done with the citric acid soak.
Here is our mica chimney out of the citric acid. You can see how it's kind of cleaned things up. We just need to rinse it well, and we need to rub the steel parts down with some steel wool. See how easily that moves now, not sticking at all. Alright, so we'll dry this off, and then I will put it in the oven at about 300-350 degrees to get all of the water out. Alright, and we've got our brass parts coming out of the citric acid now, so I'll just rinse them and clean them with steel wool.
So last of all, on the citric acid, we've got the fount. Probably leave it in here for about 20 minutes. The solution is pretty weak, so it shouldn't damage the nickel, but this will clean it off and get it ready for polishing. And if there's any crud left in the fount, this should work pretty well to dissolve it. Although when I dumped that unleaded fuel out of it, that seemed to have done a pretty good job itself of dissolving everything. The fuel came out very thick and dark green. So this should be the last bit of citric acid bath. All right, and here's the fount. So that citric acid bath takes care of all this crud on the outside. Even have a light wipe down with the steel wool. Rinse it out. There's a lot of stuff in there. It's running pretty clear when I dump it out, so I'm going to dry this as best I can and then pour some methyl hydrate in here. That will absorb any water that's left. I'll dump that out and it should be ready to polish. Let's polish all these parts. I'm using a medium buffing wheel and some white number 5 polishing compound. All set to put this back together. The fount, I think, polished up very nicely, better than I expected. It's got a few scratches, but the spots that were on it all came off. The vent cleaned up pretty well. I didn't do any filming on that because it was already pretty clean. I used some Barkeeper's Friend and scrubbed some of the stuff that was stuck on there, but not much of a change there. We'll get started on this guy. So the first thing we'll do is we'll put our fuel cap back together. So I've got a new cap gasket here. Get that guy on there.
got a video, I'll try to throw a link up above to my video on replacing fuel cap gaskets. Going down. These 3-piece cap gaskets are easy to replace because you can just burn them out of this old insert. A little more dexterity without the gloves. There we go. All right, and let's put our pump back together. So the first thing, find what I had done with this, but this is a brand new check valve. I believe this is brand new, literally. It's been made by a supplier for old Coleman parts. I actually did put the other one in citric acid and tried some carb cleaner on it in the past, and it's here somewhere. Here it is. And it just won't seal consistently, so I'm replacing it. Let me just thread that in by hand. Ready. Now, the pump. See these pieces out here. So there's our cap and our spring. And that nut on there first. The backer, a little spacer, our pump leather, the other washer, there we go, and the other nut. I don't know if you can hear the rain. The wind seems to have died down momentarily. You may see the lights flicker a bit. They said we're expecting a power outage tonight, probably. Hopefully not until I'm done with this, and then I'll have something to light the house with. So the pump leather is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and add some oil to it. I'm going to use some 3-in-1 oil. You can use any oil you like, really, as long as it's not vegetable based. Coleman used neat's foot oil, and they sold little tubes of neat's foot oil. Get our air stem. Automotive oil works fine. In fact, I've recently, when I was camping in the summer, took some oil from my dipstick to get a Coleman Model 1 stove going. Just don't use anything vegetable based because it goes rancid and gets gummy and it will harden your pump leather. You do not want that. All right. Give that a and I can feel I'm not feeling air coming back out through that check valve anymore, so that's good. Now, this is our pickup. So, got these parts just loosely put together so they don't get lost. So this is our pickup tip as opposed to the generator tip. So that just threads in here. And see, this brass is pretty corroded from whatever the gasoline left on there. Tighten it just enough so it's snug, but not so it snaps. These are brass parts, so they're easy to snap if you're not careful. And we'll just give this a nice snug up as well. And this goes down, and if you're wondering, the reason why it's this shape is because of the pump tube. The pump tube is running down at an angle like this, and so the pickup has to clear it. So just get it in there, and that should be good. Now, you remember the uppers all came off pretty much in one piece. So let's take care of all of that now. So we've got our burner tubes. Again, brass, don't overdo it. Especially in some of these older lanterns, these threads can be just eaten away by the heat. These are actually in good shape, but I've had to replace burner tubes on occasions, usually on old quick lights of a similar vintage, because those threads had kind of gotten eaten away, and if you over tighten it, they just break off. So there's our manifold, or I'll call it the burner. We've got our air tube and the upper valve. This guy needs to go on here first. Just thread that all the way up for now. Way. And then we've got our nipple here. I'm going to put some thread sealant on here just to be safe. I'll also put it down on the bottom when the time comes. I'm not going to put this in with the same force that it was in before. The same torque. Okay, yeah, I think we're ready now. So the riser nipple goes in the center hole, and the air tube goes in that back hole. And then we'll put this on here like that, but before we do, I want to put some thread sealant on here as well, just to be safe. And let's see. Thread it in now, so just see if we can turn the whole thing. That bung is at a slight angle. I noticed as I was polishing it, but now I understand why it felt funny when I was taking it apart. As I rotate this air tube leans over at certain points in the rotation, and I figured out that's because that bung is at a slight angle, which also explains why the whole lantern looked like it might have had a bit of a lean to it. Get this lined up. tighten this nut down, and that will lock the collar and frame it. I believe this little quick light, these quick light wrenches come in really handy on these. A mil-spec wrench will get you in here as well. Alright, I think that's good, and we're not dimpling in the middle. And it's actually looked pretty straight here. So now we want to put the burner on. And that's where it's tight. That's where it needs to be. But it was like that before and I wasn't getting any leaks there, so I think we'll be all right. So we've got our generator. We'll put this together first. Got our gas jet. We've got our needle there. Just want to make sure we don't squash or bend the needle. All right. Just feel that there. We're good. We've got our new valve body. Just put this back together. Hold that there. And tighten this. I feel that's still pretty loose. So there's a graphite packing in there that needs to be plenty tight in order to keep it from leaking. So basically the idea is make it as tight as you can and yet still be able to turn the knob. So that feels good there. As it gets hot, it will probably get a little bit more difficult to turn, but that feels good. If you get it on here, and you notice there's fuel leaking around the valve stem, you can tighten it up a little bit more. So this guy will go up in here, but first we need our retainer screw and our little, people call it a t-shirt because of the shape. So this is an awkward spot. One thing I don't like with these when you do put an R55 on is this upright is right in the wrong spot. Needs to be good and tight because its nipple is just a brass on brass seat. And we've got our generator. Upright's kind of in a bad spot for this too. Loose. it's starting to tighten up. Let's back it off a bit. I like putting this cleaning actuator at a little bit of an angle, sticking out to the side so that the upright isn't in the way when you're trying to turn it. All right. We're good to go there. Now, let's put on a couple of mantles. Like all 220s and 228s, these take number 21. I'm going to use these Peerless 2CHGs instead. Their Peerless is equivalent. They're considerably better than the current Coleman mantles, although even Peerless have come down in quality of late. Cut the strings off. Don't leave these strings hanging on here when you tie a mantle on. They are kind of notorious for curling down and damaging the mantle. Okay, there we go. And we are all set. Let's go ahead and back together. The globe, or the chimney came out pretty well. A little bit rough. The steel has quite a bit of pitting, but the mica turned out quite well, I think. You can really hear that wind and rain, I think. I need to get this wrapped up. My daughter said her car needs to be in the garage tonight. It's a convertible and she doesn't want it out in this weather. So, through the magic of video editing, I will be back momentarily and this will be gassed up, pumped up, and ready to go. Okay, let's bring these in. And you might notice I reclocked this. I took it another half a turn. I was realizing the pump needs to be on the right of the valve and the filler on the left, and I had it the opposite. And many of these awful matches it takes to light. Since this is a big hat, I'm going to go ahead and leave the chimney and the vent off for lighting this, especially since this cleaner is a little difficult to get to. Sure. Let's see if it holds pressure this time. Yeah, we're losing pressure. looking better. So give me a minute to let these mantles burn in, and I'll be back. It's working now. Let's put this back together. And let's turn the lights out. All right, there we go. I think everything's working properly now. I'll swap that fuel cap back later. But there you go. That's an L228 made in January of 1929. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.